Thank you both for your talks this evening. Just wanted to take this time to ask you a few questions, have a little discussion, and take questions from the audience. But I kind of want to kick it off with, Adam, in your presentation, you had the meme that people know about test and production. I guess I'd love to hear kind of both of your histories about that term, kind of how you thought about it before and how you think about it now.
Interestingly enough, that actually exact meme for me holds a lot of meaning because when I was running large-scale service at VMware, my team was responsible for hands-on labs at VMworld, and one of my developers, as a joke, actually put that as the screensaver for 500 user terminals in Moscone Center that were set up for individual lab stations.
Wow.
And we actually had a bug in our user interface because it wasn't adequately tested. And so during opening day of the conference, there was about a 30-minute window where every single screen in the entire room went to that image. Yeah, it wasn't funny at the time, but I think for me then it had very different connotation in that it was this notion of kind of cowboy development of kind of individuals that didn't take testing seriously or hadn't been in situations where the production product mattered. And that made it very real for the individuals on my team. And as I started working more and more in the dev tools space, started to realize that teams that were running large-scale production environments well, teams like Google, teams like Netflix, teams like AWS, they, by their very nature, they were doing test and production because they realized that it was an imperative to their success of their production environment. And so it was something that I started to think a lot more about, and the reason why you and I started this meetup, right? So I think that it's something that has definitely started to transition, and as I mentioned in my talk, I've definitely seen the transition with our customers as well.
Yeah, and so for me, I guess it was when I was working for a big bank, and we deployed once a quarter. And the way we did that was we said from Friday afternoon till Sunday morning, once a quarter, you took off the whole weekend from your family, and you sat on a phone call and chat rooms, and you did your deployment. And invariably, doing that deployment would break something, and there would be emergencies and fires and all of this stuff because they were trying to deliver 3 months worth of functionality and software that we had all been working on and trying to coordinate with each other and all ram it into production at exactly the same time. And from there, so I thought, obviously I was like, this sucks, but that is just how it's done. From there, I went to go work at Zappos.com, and we worked very closely with the folks at Amazon and used their tooling. And the release process at Amazon was 180 degrees different than what we were doing at a big bank. And I thought, oh, there is some hope. There is maybe an answer to some of the pain that we felt every 3 months on the weekends. And then, and I dug into what Amazon was doing, but it was so complicated. It was very Amazon specific. So once some of the technology like containers and Kubernetes and some of all these cloud native tooling things came out and started to come out, it started to resemble, I was like, oh my God, that's what Amazon had 8 years ago. And once I saw Envoy Proxy, when I saw Matt Klein give a talk on Envoy Proxy about 3 years ago, I thought that is something that gives you a level of control over the network traffic so that you can separate out deployment and release, like you mentioned, And that is incredibly, incredibly powerful. And so from there, for the last 3 years or so, I've been working with enterprise customers to help them understand exactly what that means, because I don't know if they really understand. I don't think they've had the aha moment, or at least some of them have had the aha moment about what that really enables. So that's what I've been working on.
So the next question, just want to ask about, it seems like in the last 5 years or so, there's been really proliferation of feature management companies as well as service mesh. I guess why now? What's changing, and why now?
I think with the realization that organizations, or at least like again, I'm talking about enterprises, they realize that technology can be a differentiator for their business. And as they look to adopt, so they look at Netflix and they look at Google and they look at what these internet companies have done, and they're trying to go off and do that. So some of this technology is coming out, is being open sourced, and is becoming more available, and coupled with their desire to figure out, okay, how do we take this 100-year-old company and become more agile and all of this stuff. There's legitimate market pressure for them to do that, because they're seeing like Borders and Blockbuster and you can go on and on and on about these institutions that are being disrupted by technology companies, and they don't want to be the next one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that totally agree with everything that Christian said. I think the other aspect of it that I took away from the time that I spent at GitHub was also just the GitHub phenomenon, where seeing how, I think that relates to the open source movement, but making it much more accessible, making it something that was much more communal, and really kind of helping to accelerate the building of these tools, but also making it much more common for folks to have a way to adopt them and get kind of onboarding support, or try them out or things like that, and really kind of move forward. Coupling that with the notion of people feeling or realizing that if they didn't move forward, then somebody else was going to do it for them, right? And so that's kind of like the Uber phenomenon or Lyft phenomenon of like disruption.
So you spoke about kind of this daughter-mother-in-law dichotomy, this idea of a digital native and someone that expects changes on more of a kind of a seasonal basis. Are there examples in your own product, in LaunchDarkly or Solo, of how you think about that?
Yeah, so I think that, for me, as I've spoken with a lot of our customers and prospects, companies that are looking to move in the direction of either feature management or just more generally in this, kind of the enterprise term of digital transformation, but looking to basically modernize their developer tool chain, their workflows, there are a lot of constraints that aren't even, that are applicable to that same problem statement, that are not necessarily, kind of generational, as kind of I made it personal, right? One great example is regulation, and you think about organizations that work with unions, have worked with a number of government organizations that have union employees or union workers, and in their union contracts now, it is not uncommon for them to actually have language about the number of times in which the software that they're required to use can be updated, as well as the training requirements around updates to software. And so if the organization is using some type of tool or platform that updates at a cadence that is beyond those restrictions, they say, I can't use this, right? Or they put unreasonable restrictions on that vendor, that provider, that are very difficult for them to accommodate.
And I think for Solo, we sell to large organizations that for them to adopt some of our technology, they have to have to be at a certain level, let's just say, like in terms of, I'll give a simple example. They need to have a particular version of Kubernetes or a minimum version of Kubernetes, for example. And sometimes, they want to adopt the later technologies and the newer technologies, and they want to operationalize them. But for them to do that is such a phenomenal or like Herculean effort to get to the next version and to upgrade and keep current. Yeah. That sometimes will affect us because then we don't, we have to wait for them to upgrade and so on. And then the other part of our product stack where we're going to build more of a SaaS version, obviously that gives us the ability to deliver features more quickly and leverage some of the techniques and methodologies around progressive delivery and reducing the risk of making changes and so on. Because enterprise users, enterprise organizations, they're also very resistant to moving too fast. So yeah, that's something that we definitely deal with very much.
Do you have any questions for each other before I open it up?
I think we're very complementary in what we're doing at our different organizations.
I would concur.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you think of any, how about folks from the audience? Oh, and we have a mic out there over here.
Oh. So in my opinion, you're going to need traffic control. You're going to need, whether it's a monolith or a ton of microservices or whatever. At Solo, what we're trying to do is help people take that transition at the speed that they're able to take that transition. So some of the more forward-looking stuff that we're building right now that depends on service mesh, that wouldn't be applicable to a small environment like that. But we do have a API gateway built on Envoy proxy, which would be much more suitable to that sort of environment. So we're looking at it as a series of stages and a series of iterations to get toward, if you need to, right? If you need to. And in my opinion, I would say if you guys are small teams starting out with a monolith, that's exactly the right way to do it. Don't overcomplicate it by doing the microservice and bringing all this other stuff. Go at the speed that makes sense and doesn't take on any unnecessary complexity for that.
Yeah, I think that for us at LaunchDarkly, we have tried to create some entry-level offerings for small organizations that are kind of modestly priced, and give you the ability to start adopting the methodologies around building with feature flags and building with feature management. The kind of main thing that we've done for like a startup your size is that we have entry-level plan that literally has just a shared login account, right? If they're just 2 or 3 engineers, you don't need the kind of granular access control or audit logging that you'd have need for when you get to an engineering team of 20 or 30 or hundreds or thousands, right? And also from a volume perspective, like trying to think about like you're not going to be doing a whole lot of flagging. You're not going to be doing you've got 3 people that are going to be pushing to production. You don't have that as nearly as much to keep track of. But getting in the practice of doing it is something that we've seen a lot of teams that are represented by individuals that are coming out of organizations that have strong feature flagging practices. They've said, look, I could build this myself, but is that where I want to be spending my time, or do I want to spend my time on the product that I'm actually going to be kind of extracting value or delivering value for? Yeah, it's something that we have talked a lot about, and I think that it is going to be somewhat dependent upon the types of services or applications that someone's offering. You brought up Gmail, or kind of the Google Work Suite is a great example where you can go into the Google Labs interface and you can effectively, it's user-facing feature flags, and that's actually how they're implemented. Where you're turning feature functionality on and off for your personal account. I think that is actually a great way to build products, and I think that being able to use LaunchDarkly in that capacity, it's not something that we see a lot of at this point in time, but it's definitely something that kind of we want to get to a place where we can scalably support that. Right now, what we encounter is more often than not, people are really looking for the kind of core infrastructure use cases, or being able to do the management from the company perspective, as opposed to pushing out that delegation all the way to the end users. But ultimately, I do agree with you that I think there is a future where that kind of end user delegation is perfectly appropriate. The other way that you can do that is you can actually use user attributes that people can change the configuration on, and then those attributes are just detected by the feature flags. So that's the way in which we encourage our users to do it today. So that gives them one kind of layer of removal or comfort for them to make sure that the change of like the actual code path is being kind of held back, to the company, whereas the user can change kind of just an attribute or a key value.
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the things I mentioned in the slides is that there are these dark, unknown areas that exist in our systems, whether we care to admit it or not, right? Security is one of those areas, and to go through and assume that different parts of the application, let's say, have different or they trust each other at levels that you expect, but then going in and proving that they do, or finding ways that they may not, or the reverse, right? So I think chaos experimentation, or more just, that's why I don't like the term, it's more exploratory experimentation, and that absolutely includes security and penetration testing and validating trust across the network and those types of things. So yeah, absolutely. I was hoping somebody would ask that question. So I'll give my first stab at it. So when you're making changes to your software, that by definition means you're going to roll out new binaries or new configuration for your applications. So one example that I've seen used is when you make a change to a stateful service, right? And that stateful service, maybe you're also making a change to the schema in the database or something, right? Now, as you make that change, you roll out that new binary, you want to deploy that and then either run some smoke tests against it or run some level of a percentage of traffic or a cohort of traffic against that new deployment. And you can use the service mesh to control the traffic to be able to do that. Now, once you get some traffic going in there, you might then want to flip the feature flag and say, okay, let's actually turn this new feature on. I mean, we made the code changes, we had the flag off, we put it out to production, looks good. Now let's actually turn the feature on. And some of those are then going to see, let's say version 2 of the schema, and some of them will see version 1, and so on. And so there's probably a lot more handful of these types of examples where it makes sense to both control the traffic as well as progressively, open up that functionality to the users.
Yeah, the analogy that I've found successful in kind of visualizing this is you use a service mesh to be able to kind of build a new building and deploy the new version of the building. And then you use the feature flags. Those are your light switches inside.
Yep.
And you can kind of turn them on and off based on wherever you place those switches, so per floor, per room, whatever you need to do. And it gives you varying levels of granularity, right? You can have the ability to be able to say, hey, I want to test out this new structure that I've created as opposed to this new feature that I want to be able to control. I don't think that, I think that the two experiences that you've had, I think both are, kind of, exist in the industry, obviously, but I think that the, notion of having a few folks with the keys to the kingdom, as you put it, is very common for older companies and companies that have not yet built the kind of stability in their infrastructure and the practices around continuous delivery and that type of methodology. A lot of times there's a fear aspect of things breaking. I think that this is something that Christian talked about of, like his experience at the bank, or, even just the idea that like you don't know what's going to happen. You build these services, and your expectation when you build them is that they're pristine and that they will always stay up and they will always be there. And with that notion, like if you're not actually constructing infrastructure and services and designing them for failure, and what I mean by that is that you are actually building things so that you're not just building them and saying, oh, this is going to stay up all the time. Because, one of my, favorite quotes from Charity Majors is, all infrastructure fails. It's just, it's true. At some point in time, there's going to be a stress that you didn't account for. And so the question is are you going to build it so that it fails gracefully and it has, some notion of what those failure modes are going to be? Have you actually planned for them? Have you tested them? Have you validated those tests that it does what you expect it to when it fails? Or are you just going to cross your fingers and say, no, I'm just going to make sure it never fails, right? And I think more and more companies, especially with more and more companies putting their products and services out on the internet, where there is so much that goes on that we can't account for, that they are confronted with this requirement from a user perspective of clean failure modes, of understood failure modes, and being able to actually have services and products that fail gracefully. So I think the experience that you've had is this transition where you've moved to a company that Coursera is obviously, they're built around, internet delivery, right? That's the only way they function. And so they've had to make sure that their failure modes are thought through and that they, have the ability to accommodate for those. Now, a byproduct of that is that they feel a lot more confident failing, because it's not about whether or not you fail. That's eventually going to happen. It's how long does it take you to recover? Right, the metric that's been increasing in popularity from operations team perspective or from a DevOps methodology perspective is mean time to recovery, or MTTR, right? This is like, how long does it take me to recover from some type of failure or outage, as opposed to, kind of this notion of 5 nines of, service availability or things like that. Ultimately, if your ability to recover from an incident is not well thought through and orchestrated, then the number of nines you have isn't going to matter. Did that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
And I was just going to add that it's also, so it's a very organizational, it's part of their DNA even, right? Some of the larger companies have been around for a while. They've figured out, at one point, they figured out how to make money and make a lot of money, right? And so they built their organization in such a way to continue to turn that crank to make money. And you do that by optimizing for efficiency, and you segment people into their one little spot, and where they don't have to see the big picture. They work on their one little thing, and they build an engine that's able to churn out money, right? But some of these other companies, they might be churning out money, but they're less a machine, and they're more organic, and their ability to adapt to change, and the market around them is fundamentally built to be not a machine. It's to be adaptive and reactive and change. And so from the old enterprise machine model, where you have very low trust with anybody else in your organization, everything is completely siloed, and you hand off over walls and stuff, and you separate out people's responsibility for the actions that they take, versus the, let's learn, let's try something new, and if it fails, that's fine. We're learning, right? And then we're exploring new ways to deliver value to our customers and make money. So organizationally, the two things are also quite different. And so the enterprises are trying to figure out, how do I become more like this organism that is able to adapt and survive, decentralized and high trust and all that stuff. That's a huge struggle that they're going through right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you raise an interesting point with the kind of delegation model and the kind of number of options that are there, and I think those are actually two separate challenges. I think that the delegation model does not necessarily require that you have an infinite or even a large number of options that you are allowing access to. It could be just a standard Boolean true or false of is a feature on or off, and that could vary for various end users or customers, or in your case universities. But from a code perspective, that's literally you've just got two code paths, and then you've just defined users going down code path A or code path B, and so it's fairly simple. The other aspect that you're talking about of creating a multitude of variants, a multivariate option for all of those different end users or universities. While it's something you could do, it's not necessarily something that I would encourage unless you had a really well-defined need for it. This is kind of like the problem of the kind of end matrix problem that so many packaged software vendors used to face of what revisions did they support and for how long, right? And what you don't want to do is, as a SaaS service, you don't want to create that same combinatorial matrix. Like, that would be horrible, right? And so I would never advocate for that. I think that the idea of supporting 2 versions or maybe even 3 versions to give people some more flexibility, or one thing that we've seen a lot of our customers do is they'll have we allow for hierarchy in our flags. So you have the ability to do kind of like roll-up features where you say either you're getting the new stuff when it's available or you're not. And you are getting that at some type of regular cadence. So it could be quarterly, could be annually. And then you're getting that kind of, here's all the new stuff that's come out. And the nice part about that is it's kind of like being on, if you've ever joined a beta program from like Slack or Apple or something like that, where there are people who are just like, yeah, I blow up my machine, I don't care, but I want to see the latest and greatest features as soon as they're coming out. And then there are other people who are just like, no, I just want to be on the stable release, right? And so you can think of that as the kind of stable release model where you're saying, okay, look, I'm going to push stuff out on a regular cadence at the pace that my engineers are building, right? And therefore you're getting updates or new feature functionality or new workflows on a daily, weekly basis, whatever it is. Or you say, I want to see the new stuff, but I want to accept it when I'm ready for, updating my documentation, for doing training, for making sure that I'm not in the middle of a sales cycle or I'm not in the middle of my, peak tax season, whatever your requirements are that make it so that you want a predictable user experience, you can account for those. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Of course.
And having those control points, from the edge of ingress all the way down into the depths of your code and all the different combinations and so on that you can get, presents a pretty interesting opportunity for being able to explore what people really want. Because you give them the choice to enable all these feature flags. Users probably don't want that much choice, but it'd be interesting to put things out in front of them and see how they respond, and then build models and experimentation models that try to learn what people might want,
Yep.
And then validate that. So I mean, that becomes a really interesting space for showing people what we think they want, and then letting them tell us what they really want.
Yeah. It's that feedback loop notion, right? Where you're using these control points as a mechanism to be able to guide your iterative development, right? You think about, continuous delivery model, or even agile to a degree, where you may have large-scale epics that are split up into multiple sprints where you have an end state. But the idea of agile was that you still have the ability to be able to alter based on feedback of those individual sprints. And imagine if you were getting that feedback not just from your development team or from some type of internal organization, but you were able to incrementally ship, like in a continuous delivery model, and all of a sudden you're getting that feedback from your users, either from targeted user segments or from percentage-based rollouts to kind of randomized user segments.
Thank you all for coming out.
Yeah, thank you very
Thanks so
much.
much.